When 26-year-old Simone Johnson walked through the pristine glass doors of Meridian Financial's Manhattan headquarters that Tuesday morning, she looked nothing like the executives expected. Dressed in a simple thrift store blazer and worn but clean flats, carrying a modest handbag that had seen better days, she moved with quiet confidence through the marble lobby. The security guard barely glanced up from his newspaper as she signed in, assuming she was just another job applicant or perhaps someone from the cleaning service arriving early. What none of them knew was that Simone wasn't there for an interview. She owned the building. The elevator carried her to the 42nd floor where Meridian's executive team was already deep in their weekly strategy meeting. Through the glass conference room walls, she could see them hunched over financial reports, their expensive suits and polished shoes reflecting the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. These were the people who had rejected her loan application 3 years ago, who had laughed her out of their office when she was just a young entrepreneur with a dream and a business plan they deemed unrealistic for someone like her. Simone took a deep breath and pushed open the conference room door. The conversation stopped immediately. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward her, confusion and irritation written across their faces. Rebecca Sterling, the executive vice president, was the first to speak, her voice dripping with condescension that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. "Excuse me, honey, I think you're lost. The staff entrance is on the ground floor and we didn't order any food service today." Rebecca's colleagues chuckled, the sound sharp and dismissive in the quiet room. Simone remained calm, her voice steady and professional. "Good morning. I'm here to speak with the board about Meridian's future direction." The laughter that erupted was immediate and cruel. Richard Park, the chief financial officer, actually wiped tears from his eyes. "Oh, this is rich. Did someone from HR send you up here as some kind of diversity quota experiment? Because if this is about that urban youth outreach program, we already told them we're not interested." "I'm not from any outreach program," Simone replied, her composure unwavering despite the sting of their words. She had faced this kind of treatment before, had built armor against it over years of being underestimated and dismissed, but it still hurt, still cut deep into the part of her that remembered being a young girl with big dreams in a world that seemed determined to make her feel small. Margaret Chen, the head of human resources, leaned forward with fake concern. "Sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Are you here about the entry-level position we posted? Because that interview isn't until next week, and frankly, your presentation needs work if you want to be taken seriously in a place like this." The other executives nodded in agreement, their assumptions building on each other like a house of cards. They saw her dark skin, her modest clothes, her youth, and filled in the blanks with their own prejudices. To them, she couldn't possibly belong in their world of power lunches and million-dollar deals. "Actually," Simone said, moving further into the room, "I'd like to discuss your Q3 projections. There's an error in your risk assessment calculations that's going to cost the company approximately $12 million if it's not corrected." The room fell silent. Rebecca's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. That's proprietary information. How would you even know about our internal projections?" Simone walked to the presentation screen where their quarterly reports were displayed, pointing to a specific section with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. "Your debt-to-equity ratio calculations don't account for the upcoming regulatory changes in the Volcker rule modifications. You're also overvaluing your commercial real estate portfolio by about 15%, based on market trends from the past 6 months." The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. What Simone was saying made sense, demonstrated a level of financial sophistication that didn't match their preconceptions about who she was supposed to be. But rather than acknowledging her expertise, they doubled down on their dismissal. "Lucky guesses," Richard muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Probably read something in the Wall Street Journal." Rebecca stood up, her patience apparently exhausted. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing here, but we have a real meeting to conduct. If you want to prove you can handle working in a place like this, why don't you make yourself useful? There's a coffee shop on the ground floor. I take mine black, 2 sugars. Richard likes his with cream, no sugar. Margaret wants a vanilla latte with oat milk. She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill, waving it dismissively. Think you can handle that? The other executives began placing their orders, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of casual cruelty. They were enjoying this, Simone realized, taking pleasure in what they saw as putting someone in their proper place. The coffee run wasn't about coffee at all. It was about power, about establishing hierarchy, about making sure she knew exactly where they thought she belonged. For a moment, Simone felt the familiar weight of every slight, every dismissal, every time someone had looked at her and decided she wasn't enough. She thought about walking away, about letting them continue their meeting in their bubble of ignorance and privilege. But then she remembered why she was really here, what she had worked so hard to achieve, and what these people represented in the larger story of her life. "I'll be right back," she said quietly, taking the $20 bill from Rebecca's manicured fingers. The executives burst into delighted laughter as she left the room, their voices carrying into the hallway behind her. "Did you see her face when you mentioned the coffee run?" Margaret giggled. "I think we scared her off." "Good," Rebecca replied. "The last thing we need is another diversity hire who thinks she can waltz in here and pretend to understand high finance. Some people need to learn their place, but Simone didn't head to the elevators. Instead, she walked to the end of the hallway, pulled out her phone, and made a single call. "Gerald? It's me. Yes, I'm at Meridian now." Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "It's exactly what we expected. Actually, it's worse. They don't just lack competence, they lack basic human decency. Go ahead and execute the plan. All of it." Back in the conference room, the executives had returned to their meeting, already forgetting about the young woman they had just humiliated. They were deep in discussion about their expansion plans when the door opened again. This time, however, it wasn't Simone who entered. Gerald Martinez, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, walked in carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of serious expression that made experienced business people pay attention. Behind him came two other individuals, a woman with silver hair who radiated executive authority, and a younger man with the bearing of someone accustomed to corporate boardrooms. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gerald announced, his voice cutting through their chatter like a blade, "I apologize for the interruption, but we have some urgent business to discuss." Rebecca looked annoyed at the intrusion. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "This is a private meeting." Gerald opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of official documents. "My name is Gerald Martinez, and I represent Phoenix Capital Group. As of 9:37 this morning, Phoenix Capital completed the acquisition of a controlling interest in Meridian Financial. These documents detail the terms of the purchase and the immediate organizational changes that will be implemented." The blood drained from Rebecca's face. "That's impossible. We would have been notified of any takeover attempt. The board would have—" "The board was notified," Gerald replied smoothly. "Your shareholders accepted an offer that was 30% above market value. The acquisition was completed through a series of shell companies and private equity arrangements that made it virtually undetectable until finalization. All perfectly legal, all properly documented." Richard Park grabbed for the papers, his hands shaking as he scanned the legal text. But who? Who's behind Phoenix Capital? Why would they want Meridian?" The door opened again, and this time Simone walked in. But she looked different now, not because she had changed clothes, but because she carried herself differently. The quiet confidence had transformed into unmistakable authority. The woman they had dismissed as lost, as beneath their notice, as someone who existed only to fetch their coffee, now commanded the room simply by entering it. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," Simone said, her voice carrying the weight of power that none of them had bothered to hear before. "I'm Simone Johnson, founder and CEO of Phoenix Capital Group. As of this morning, I'm also the majority owner of Meridian Financial." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret Chen actually dropped her pen, the small sound echoing in the suddenly airless room. Rebecca Sterling's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound, like a fish gasping for water. That's, that's impossible, Rebecca finally whispered. You can't be. Just what, Rebecca? Simone's voice was steady, but there was fire in her eyes. Just black? Just young? Just a woman you felt comfortable humiliating in front of your colleagues? Just someone you assumed you could treat like dirt because of what you saw on the surface? She walked to the head of the conference table, the same spot where Rebecca had stood minutes earlier while ordering coffee. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely that it felt like the earth had tilted on its axis. 3 years ago, I came to this office with a business plan and a loan application. I was 23, fresh out of business school with a Harvard MBA, and I had identified a gap in the market that could generate significant returns for both borrower and lender. Do you remember what you told me, Rebecca? Rebecca's face had gone completely white. She remembered now, the young woman with the ambitious plans and the impressive credentials who had sat in her office, earnest and hopeful. She had dismissed her in less than 10 minutes. You told me that Meridian doesn't take chances on high-risk demographics, Simone continued. You said that people like me should focus on more realistic goals. You actually suggested I apply for a position in your mailroom instead. Richard Park was frantically shuffling through papers, as if he could find some escape clause in the legal documents that would undo this nightmare. But Phoenix Capital Group, we researched all major financial players. We would have known. You researched the players you thought mattered, Simone replied. You looked at the old boys' network, the established firms, the people who looked like you and moved in your circles. You never imagined that a young black woman could build something that would threaten your comfortable little world. She gestured to Gerald, who began pulling additional documents from his briefcase. Phoenix Capital Group has been operating for 2 years now. We specialize in identifying undervalued companies with systemic leadership problems and transforming them into profitable, inclusive organizations. Meridian wasn't our first acquisition, and it won't be our last. Margaret Chen found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. What does this mean for us? Simone smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm glad you asked. Gerald, would you please read from the organizational restructuring document? Gerald cleared his throat. Effective immediately, the following personnel changes are being implemented. Rebecca Sterling, Executive Vice President, terminated for cause, including creation of a hostile work environment and discriminatory practices. Richard Park, Chief Financial Officer, terminated for cause, including the financial projection errors identified earlier in this meeting. Margaret Chen, Head of Human Resources, terminated for cause for failure to maintain professional standards and enabling discriminatory behavior. The three executives sat in stunned silence as Gerald continued reading names and positions. Not everyone was being fired. Simone had spent months researching the company culture and had identified employees at all levels who had shown integrity and competence. But the leadership that had created and perpetuated the toxic environment was being systematically removed. Your severance packages will reflect the same level of consideration you showed me today, Simone said when Gerald finished reading. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Your access to all systems and facilities has already been terminated. Rebecca finally found her voice, though it came out as a desperate plea. Simone, please, I made a mistake. I was having a bad day and if I had known who you were, if you had known who I was. Simone's voice was sharp now, cutting through Rebecca's excuses. That's exactly the problem, Rebecca. You treated me badly because you thought you could, because you thought I was powerless, because you thought I didn't matter. Your behavior today wasn't about who I am, it was about who you are. She looked around the room at the remaining employees, the ones who would be staying to help rebuild the company culture. The way we treat people when we think they can't help us or hurt us, that's who we really are. Character isn't about being polite to your equals or deferential to your superiors. Character is about treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or what they can do for you. As security arrived to escort the terminated executives out, Simone turned to address the employees who remained. I know this is shocking and probably frightening. Change always is. But I want you to know that I didn't buy this company to destroy it. I bought it because I saw potential, not just financial potential, but human potential. Under new leadership, Meridian will become a place where talent is recognized regardless of what package it comes in. Gerald was already setting up for the next phase of the transition, pulling out organizational charts and introducing the new leadership team that would be taking over immediately. But Simone stepped away from the business details for a moment, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city stretching out below. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, not just the 3 years since Rebecca Sterling had dismissed her from this very office, but the lifetime of being underestimated, overlooked, and written off because of the color of her skin and the circumstances of her birth. She thought about her grandmother, who had worked as a domestic worker for wealthy families and had told young Simone that success was the best revenge against people who tried to make you feel small. But this wasn't about revenge, Simone realized. It was about transformation. It was about taking the energy that came from being dismissed and channeling it into something constructive, something that could create opportunities for others who might otherwise be overlooked. The coffee orders were still written on the whiteboard where Rebecca had smugly listed them earlier. Simone walked over and erased them, replacing them with 3 simple words: respect, dignity, opportunity. As the day progressed and the transition continued, word of what had happened began to spread throughout the building. Employees who had witnessed the morning's event spoke in hushed, amazed tones about the young woman who had walked in looking like an intern and revealed herself to be their new owner. The story would spread beyond the building, beyond the company, becoming the kind of legend that people tell to illustrate that you never know who you're talking to or what they might be capable of. But for Simone, the real satisfaction wasn't in the dramatic revelation or the immediate justice of seeing prejudiced executives face consequences for their actions. It was in the knowledge that Meridian Financial would now become the kind of company where talented people from all backgrounds could thrive, where decisions would be made based on competence and character rather than connections and assumptions. As she settled into her new office, the corner suite that had belonged to the previous CEO, Simone reflected on the lesson she had learned years ago and that had been reinforced so powerfully today. People reveal their true character when they think they hold all the power, when they believe their actions will have no consequences, when they assume the person in front of them is powerless to affect their world. But power is rarely where people expect to find it. Sometimes it walks in wearing thrift store clothes and carrying dreams that others are too narrow-minded to see. Sometimes it speaks quietly and absorbs insults with dignity, waiting for the right moment to transform not just a situation, but an entire culture. The most dangerous mistake you can make is assuming that someone's current circumstances define their ultimate potential. Because the person you dismiss today might just own your world tomorrow.